everyone, this is Zach Edwards with another episode of the Adventure Box podcast. That's right, every week we come to you with stories and tales and history of history, all different things. So on Mondays and Wednesdays, we do American history. So like this week, we're going to be talking about the colonies. We're going to start the colonial life episodes, and this is going to go on for the next month. It's about 4 weeks. And then what we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking about all the different colonies that were throughout the country of North America, but coming from the perspective of those that created, settled them. So we're going to talk about first, we're going to talk about the English. Though they weren't the first ones to settle, we did this for a reason. So we go from the English, then we go to the Dutch, the Swedish. Those actually came together with the English at one point. We talked about Spanish and Portuguese, and then we come back to the French. And why? Because there's going to be a war, a big war. And so we're going to be talking about the French, who then later, just after this point, we're going to get all the way up to it, enter into the French and Indian War. So this is very exciting. There's so much to show you and to go through. So let's start talking about this. Okay, so first off, we're going to start with the English. Why the English? Because the English are, well, they basically settled North America or conquered North America. So all the different parts on the East Coast colonies were settled by different people, but they were all conquered by the British. And so we're going to use them first, the English first, and then we will go back into the French, or end up in the French, and then we'll be going to the war. I didn't want to basically do everything up front and then go to the British and then go to the French and then go, because it wasn't as solid as I wanted to do. So, but this way, we're going to actually create a timeline of things, of colonies that were essential for the expansion of North America. Now, plenty is going to be happening in the South America. We'll mention it, especially when we talk about the Portuguese and the Spanish. We'll even go into the Russians, which will be later on, but essential because that's Alaska and part of California. So, all that known, we're going to be talking about that this whole month. Colonial life. We're going to be talking about the colonies and how people lived and so forth. But to start off, we're actually going to start off with, look at that. This is between Virginia and South Carolina. Now, why would we do these two different states? Because there was a history for the English. They actually started a colony called Roanoke. Do you remember Roanoke? You ever heard of them? Okay, let's go to Roanoke. First off, this was Sir Walter Raleigh. Sir Walter Raleigh put together this expedition coming from England over to North America and landed in basically North Carolina. And so by landing in North Carolina, he was able to set up a colony, and it was called Roanoke. The reason why you don't really hear much about Roanoke is because it mysteriously disappeared. So Sir Walter Raleigh never actually went to Roanoke. Just so you know, he was not an explorer as much as he was a financier and manager of different expeditions coming from England. He basically set up a lot of these, and he did actually go on a few of them. And we talked about that last week, actually 2 weeks ago, something like that. Sir Walter Raleigh was essential when it came to that, because it basically made England think, hey, we need to start expanding and we need to start going to this new area that they just found. So to the new world. Okay, so Sir Walter Raleigh comes over and, or sorry, not him, his group sails over, and all of a sudden what happens? Well, they don't have enough supplies. So they send ships back to go pick up more supplies and bring them back. And by the time they come back, it's gone. It's totally gone. So let's see. This is Sir Walter Raleigh. I'm going to show you. This is what Roanoke may have looked like from a map point of view. So Roanoke Island is in the middle of a bay where it was actually close enough. This doesn't give you a good representation of it, but it's close enough that you could actually travel across the little river to mainland. And that's actually what they think that happened. The settlers decided to leave. And so they left a message. This was the message. If you can see it, it's basically a tree with 3 letters written in it. C-R-O. What in the world could that mean? Actually, they think that it actually meant Krakatoa, which was actually if I remember correctly, it's another settlement that they were hoping to settle. And so now I'll go back to this page. See, in this drawing that was back in 1800s when they made this drawing, they wrote the whole Krakatoan. But the problem is they didn't write Krakatoan in there, or Croatoan in the tree. They actually just did 3 letters, C-R-O. And then the assumption is that that's what they were writing out, but that's not what was actually there. So no one actually knows to this day what happened to those people. Most people have assumptions, theories, ideas, but nothing's been proven. So what happens to English at this point? Well, they actually wait a while. And why is this? Well, a lot happens in England, especially for King James. Read in the curriculum, you're going to get a lot of information about what was happening to King James during that time and why. Because of all these different wars, he could not actually send anyone out there. Now, interesting enough, Roanoke was settled in 1584. Now, it disappeared 1590. So there was actually about 6 years, and there's probably about 5 years of a colony trying to work. And then when the ships went back, it took them a while to come back across the ocean again as well. So all that built in together made it basically, when they found it disappeared, gone, destroyed, it was 1590. Now, when did the English send out another expedition to settle the east coast of the United States? 1606. This is when they gave the Virginia Company, so a company instead of a person, managed it, and they sent over ships to settle this area. Now, they didn't actually land in Roanoke. They actually went a little north, which again is why I gave you that picture. But I'm going to actually show you another picture. Nope, this one. I have a better picture. Oh, I guess I don't right now. Okay, so this little picture basically shows you that North Carolina is where Roanoke Island was, the lost colony. And then quite a bit above it is where they settled Jamestown. And this is in Virginia. So today we're going to be talking about Virginia, and we're going to be talking about Massachusetts. 2 very different areas, very different reasonings for being there. But it gives you a better understanding of 2 different types of people. So now, who was in this party? Well, if you remember, John Smith. Now, why would you remember John Smith? One reason you might remember him is from the Pocahontas story that Disney gave, and it was so full of falsehoods, so full, but it's okay, because it got people to understand who Pocahontas was, John Smith, and so on and so forth. Now, during this time, John Smith arrives in Jamestown. He is also exploring the area. Well, him and his party are captured by the Algonquin. Man. Yeah, I'm going to have to find that one out. I'll get back to you on the actual name. It just slipped my mind. But what they did was they took him and killed everyone else off, but they took the captain, and then they dragged him through the towns, the villages of the natives that were there. And why'd they do that? Because they were trying to show their possession. So the Native Americans actually did believe in possession. They captured him. They were his. Well, at this point, they were going to execute him. And this is where the history actually becomes questionable. There's no actual evidence or stories except for the stories sent in John Smith's letters back to England that Pocahontas actually saved his life. Talked her father, who was the the chief, to not execute him, and to actually create a relationship between the Indians and the settlers. This basically made it so that there could be peace. So Pocahontas is actually a messenger of peace. She was an actual person, but all throughout her history, she was a part of a piece. So, 1609, what happens? It's called starving time. It's basically when Jamestown had a food shortage and nearly died. Only 60 out of the original 500 settlers were still alive after this starving time. And this was a lot of time over the winter, 1609 to 1610. So this is interesting to know. Now here's something else. Okay, so in the Pocahontas story in Disney, who was the love interest there? Because they always had a love interest. Well, they had Pocahontas, who was the hero. She was the heroine. For anyone that says that Disney did not have heroines, they only had princesses that were had to be saved by the prince. In this story, there was a prince or a captain who was saved by a princess. Check that out. Okay, check your history. There you go. But who did you think should, after watching the movie, if you ever saw the movie, who do you think should have ended up with Pocahontas? John Smith, right? Well, actually, that's not true. He didn't actually do that. So, and actually, what happened with him is he actually burned himself so severely they had to send him back to England. But there was another person, another suitor that came around. This is 1612. So, this man by the name of John Rolfe. John Rolfe was from England, sailed over, and during a storm had to go down to the Caribbean to get around the storm, and actually got shipwrecked there. So they started building this new ship. Well, John Rolfe during this time found a new crop called tobacco. Now they had been growing tobacco. Everybody knew about tobacco. They even tried it up north in the North America, but they could never get it to work. John Rolfe found a type of tobacco that worked in the Caribbean, and when he got on the ship, he sailed north. And when he sailed north, he was able to plant it there. So tobacco became a big thing for Virginia, and they had huge amounts of fields of this new tobacco, and they'd ship it back to England, they'd use it and so forth. Here's the interesting thing. Okay, so it was the Powhatan tribe. That's where Pocahontas belonged to. But here's the interesting thing. So John Rolfe goes up there. He becomes very, very wealthy. During this time, there's also an uprising between the English and the Native Americans there, or natives there. And so what happens is they say kidnapped, a lot of history books, but Pocahontas was actually taken in by a family under duress, probably, where she could not leave. But again, Pocahontas was the messenger of peace during this time. And she was still trying to build up this relationship between the English and the natives. And so what happened was she actually stayed with this family. She probably could have escaped. I don't think they really could have not escaped. But she was such friends with the settlers, she wanted to create this relationship. While with this family, she actually converts to Christianity. And she takes on the name of Rebecca. So at this point, you have Pocahontas, now Rebecca, who's also known as Pocahontas, who was a Powhatan, and the chief, when the chief found out that they had her, they stopped their attacks because they were just attacking the settlers. The settlers weren't attacking the natives. The natives were attacking the settlers because they were expanding too much. So you can somewhat understand both sides. But it was Pocahontas who actually went out to her father to say, "Stop! Stop what you're doing. Stop the fighting. Stop the killing. We don't need to do this." And because of the love of the father to Pocahontas, he stopped and told everyone it had to stop at that point. So there was peace between the land. So what happens when John Rolfe actually becomes in love with her? Well, the chief actually lets him marry. And again, she becomes another messenger of peace. She's bringing more peace to the settlement. Everything's great. Okay, I'm going to leave you at about 1619, because 1619 is where they have the first representative assembly, which is called the House of Burgess. And this is where leaders of the colony actually come together and have representation for those in the colony. It's the first real government set up in the colony, though it does have a lot of influence by England, making them sure they can actually do the things. What happens also, 1619. Okay, this is also the place where the first, what would be slaves, are shipped over from Africa. Now, here's the interesting thing. They were not set for North America because North America had laws against slavery and selling slaves. They were not allowed to be slaves if they came to America. What they were is they were supposed to go down to the Caribbean, and they were actually captured by pirates. The pirates, they can't sell them in the Caribbean because everyone's out for them. So they said, well, let's go to the English. Let's sell them to the English. And pirates or privateers, I think they considered themselves privateers at the time. But to the ones trying to sell them, they were definitely pirates. Okay, so they bring these families of people from Africa, they bring them to Virginia. Now, Virginia does not have a law on slavery, except there is no allowed slavery. What they do have in the law is that you are allowed to have servitude, indentured servants. Now, there have been people before the Africans came over to the Americas, or to North America, to the colonies, say just Jamestown. There were rules already established for servitude because people were already coming over from England. The debtors, they'd be sold to someone in England who would pay their debt, and then that person had to work for a certain amount of years for that person to earn their freedom or earn their non-servitude. So this was fine. A lot of people actually came over, basically said, I will sign a piece of paper, you get me over there, I'll work for a few years, and then I want my freedom to start my own business, my own land, and so forth. So that's another way they got more people to come over. There was also children, interesting enough, that came from England and were sent there as well. Now, these were more of not really slaves, but they were people being buying the passage of rights, passage on the ships to come to the New World. There's, again, orphans, debtors, criminals, anybody that the English did not want in their area, they shipped across. And so people would pay their passage through servitude. Well, what happens when the Africans come over? There is no slavery. So what happens? They become servants. Yes, they become indentured servants, which means you have a contractual agreement that you will serve this person until that point. They got to have their own families. They got to live outside of the household. They did not live on a plantation at the time. There were no plantations at the time. They got to actually walk around and do things and even vote on certain things at that time because they were considered indentured servants. Now, remember, slavery doesn't actually come into play until later on. Around the 1640s is when criminals, people that had tried to escape their servitude, were made to become slaves. People that came over as criminals were allowed to be slaves. So they did start working it into the system. But what happens as soon as you let something work into the system, people will take advantage of it. So, tell you one more story. There is a former indentured servant who becomes free and has a lot of land. He has a great estate. He has children. And what does he have? He has indentured servants. He bought them, just like everyone else. But there was one person who actually started working for them and went over the time, and he would not let it go. So that servant went to some of the neighboring colonists who were actually white at the time, and said, I need help. I cannot get this guy to let me go, and I'm not going to break the law. So those colonists actually bring him to court, say, hey, we need to bring you to court. And he wins. He wins his freedom. But what happens is this same person, I can't remember his name. You'll see it in the curriculum. But he says, no, that's mine. I own him. I mean, this is a person that used to be an indentured servant, now saying that he owns someone. And he went back to court. Well, the funny thing is the colonists that were outside that were not as wealthy as this one person. And the former servant, who was now in limbo because they're in the court case, couldn't afford it. And so because of those circumstances, he was actually made the first slave. It was in the 1750s. Sorry, 1650s? 1650s. And because of that, all of a sudden, you started having slavery in Virginia. Different things happen in different areas. This is just talking about Virginia. So let's make it, I can't spend my whole time talking about this because we have a little bit more to go, because the next part is very important. This part is Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania, no, it's not Pennsylvania, sorry, wrong, Massachusetts. The reason why Massachusetts is so important is because this is where the Pilgrims come in. Okay, so let's go to the next. This is Massachusetts as it is today, mixed in with what it was back then. So the when Wampanoag tribe lived in this area of Plymouth. What happens in Plymouth? Well, this is actually when the Pilgrims come over, sail across on the Mayflower. And this is actually significant for me because my ancestors actually came over the Mayflower. So funny enough, I didn't actually know about this a while back, but they were actually Puritans. And they actually went down to New York and settled in New York, in Long Island. So actually, if you look at this picture, you can basically see the east end of Long Island. That's where they settled at that time. Okay, so the Pilgrims come in, Puritans. 1620, Pilgrims from England, basically called separatists because they did not believe in the Church of England. They wanted to be separate. They were actually given the ability to come over. There was still some favor for these people. Now, they were leaving religious persecution. Virginia wasn't like that. Virginia did have some people escaping and such, but it was more of people being there because they wanted to settle and wanted new land. And so 1620 comes around. Now, this is, again, after people came from Africa, were shipped over from Africa. This is now the 1620s. So this is right afterwards. The English send the Pilgrims over, and they're supposed to go down and join the English area. They actually had a certain place that they're supposed to be. And they're like, not doing that, because they knew that there would be persecution wherever the king sent them. So they actually sailed straight east to Plymouth. So they have what we call Plymouth Rock, which I've actually seen. I actually saw it on my honeymoon. So 3 years ago, on my honeymoon. It was great. We were able to go out. We saw a replica of the Mayflower, it had to be a small replica because I don't know how you could fit that many people on that ship. It was tiny. When I think of ships, these large vessels that sail across the ocean, I'm thinking huge. And this thing was not huge. I mean, it wasn't a dinghy. It wasn't a boat, like a recreational boat. It was a sailboat, but it was not as big as I really expected it to be. And we got to see Plymouth Rock, the rock that's supposedly the same one. And so you look, the whole place has been built up out of the ground. But you come to this crypt, this glass cover, and you can look down. It's probably not glass, probably plexiglass. I can't remember. But you look down, and there it is. It's like 10 feet below you. And there's the rock that's considered Plymouth Rock. And that's where the English, they settled. So this is actually interesting because, so you can't see this. This is the area that the Puritans came. And they actually came over to Nassau, or Cape Cod, the Cape Cod area. And if you come out here, you're going to see all of these really, 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 really nice houses, really expensive houses in this area. But this is basically where they settled, on the hook of Cape Cod, and came into the Wampanoag tribe area. And so they actually made peace with them. And actually, it was because of them that the Puritans actually survived. So let's look at the timeline. 1620. They were allowed to come over and they arrive in Massachusetts. Now, 1624, a group of Puritans and merchants begins considering establishing a Puritan colony. Okay, so interesting enough, let's go a little bit further back because I actually forgot this. I forgot to mention this. The Mayflower Compact. What was that? That was like a set of rules that were actually established on the Mayflower. They were already basically there. That they They wanted to have a set of rules that everyone could live off of. So they had all the Puritan leaders come together in this one room and talk about all the different things that they need to consider about living in this area. Laws, organizations, those kind of things. Land, how is it going to be distributed? So they actually lived off of this is interesting, they lived off of everyone works together. And when everyone works together, they all succeed. Actually, the problem was that they found out in a lot of these colonies is that they didn't succeed when everyone basically put in their quote unquote equal effort and tried to bring in their food. So at this point, you have a lot of things that were happening. But one of the things that really did happen is that, I can't remember who it was. It's not in my notes that I have in front of me. But you're going to find it in the curriculum. But actually what happened was there was one person that came over with capitalism in mind. And he said, instead of being capitalistic, he said, we're creating a new society. We're actually going to make it so everyone else, or everyone gets their own piece of land. Everyone gets their own land. And so why are they doing this? Who's that in Virginia? Oh. I might be mixing up the two stories. Oh man, I hate when that happens. So give me 1 second. I'm going to double check all of my notes. Okay, I was just checking my notes and I was right. Okay. I just want to make sure. I don't want to ever give anything that was false. But I didn't have this in my notes, and when I'm reading through it, I'm like, wait a second, where'd this part go? This was an essential part. Okay, so it was basically like communal property. 1620, they came over, and part of that agreement in the Mayflower Compact and among the settlers was that they would actually have communal property, including land. Now the problem is that people did not equally work hard to create the society that they wanted to, this utopian society where everyone worked together. So fast forward, that was 1620. And it was actually because of that the Native Americans actually, the natives had to bail them out. They had to actually teach them how to farm, and just to create what? The first Thanksgiving, which happened in, of course, 1620. 1621. 1621, most likely late September, early October is when Plymouth Colony was able to have a celebration because of what they were able to learn. And so they had 90 Wampanoag tribal leaders and other natives from the group come over, and they celebrated together because of the great harvest, that because the tribe actually got them. I mean, they probably would not have survived without the tribe, because they knew the area. They knew how to plant corn. They knew how to plant everything. They knew how to, remember, when we talked about this, we talked about it in the past when we talked about ancient American history, and then we talked about it in ancient African history, if you watch that. But this was essential to learn about. Every tribe, every culture, every single person in ancient society, they figured one thing. This is the one thing that was the most important to them: survival. So all their technology, all their advancements was based on survival. They did not worry about entertainment, though that was part of it, but they did not worry about that. They did not worry about other things. That was what was essential to live, which is why they put so much time and effort to learning it. So their technology was farming. Their technology was learning about the environment, what you could shoot, the fowls, the animals, the deer, the seafood, all these different things that mostly became because of the tribe. And so they had this large celebration in 1621. Now, fast forward just a little bit. The society is still not working out because not everyone is putting their own equal amount of effort into this. 1623, what happens? A new governor, the first governor, has been basically elected by England to come over and govern the land. And he saw how low the productivity was. He saw how low the food storage was. So what did he do? He said, we're done. You're not doing this anymore. There's no more communal property. Everyone gets their own land. And if you don't eat, you don't eat. Or sorry, if you don't work, you don't eat. And so everyone started to farm their own lands, and anything in excess, they'd come back and sell it to somebody else. They always made sure that those that were less fortunate, the elderly, the children, those that their family had passed away, because a lot of people died during this time, they were taken care of. So that's why Pennsylvania was so essential for the learning of, well, economics for one. That was a great thing to learn. Okay, so fast forward a little bit. We still have this picture up. Massachusetts Bay Colony. This was actually started up because the New England Company, later to become the Massachusetts Bay Company, is established in 1628, so a few years afterwards, with a royal patent by King Charles I, who's now the king after King James I, and granted them rights to colonize New England. Now that's not just like Maine until Pennsylvania, and we'll talk about Pennsylvania in 2 days. So 1629, the founding of the colony first started up. And this is because of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. So they came together and they put more organization to it. The Puritans still wanted to live their way and they got some rights to do it. But there was some back and forth, which is why you actually see the Plymouth Colony and the Massachusetts Bay Colony, 2 different colonies in 1630. So there's a lot more to this. Read the curriculum. It's going to give you so much information. I mean, seriously, this curriculum is like mind-blowing. There's so much information, and it could be overwhelming. So take it in chunks. Read what you can. Read what you want to read. Grab a section of it. Read it. And then the next week, grab another section. Read it. You're going to find so much information that you would never learn in a regular public school. You would never learn in actually most college classes, because people don't teach history that much anymore. But you need to know all the ins and outs of this. And also, one last thing I forgot to mention, 1630 is when there's a mass migration. A large wave of Puritan settlers, about 700 to 1,000 of people, led by John Winthrop. So you'll get to know him, especially during the Renaissance, which we're not going to be talking about this year. That happened in Europe and then came over. But spiritual leaders, religious leaders, came over and made a lot of things happen. But they embarked on ship to Massachusetts because they were going to grow that colony of Plymouth Colony. And so this is when a lot more comes in there. A lot more of the Enlightenment comes in. There's a lot of different things. The Winthrop developed his famous sermon, which was a model of Christian charity, a city upon the hill. So they wanted to make Plymouth, or what would become Massachusetts, a light on the hill. So, okay, I think that's basically it that we're going to talk about right now. There was other large migrations of Puritans and other settlers all throughout those years. But again, you're going to have to read it yourself. I hope you enjoyed today. This was, for me, I love this information. I love learning about the different colonies. Especially, I told you this before, I love the show called Alone. And Alone is basically 10 different people put into the wilderness and you try to survive as long as possible. The person that survives the longest, mentally, physically, emotionally, that's a lot of the reasons why people leave and are not able to make it as long, they win $500,000. So that's a great motivator. But my motivator would have been, I just want to be able to do it. I think it'd be so much fun. I would be able to go hunt. I would be able to go fish. I know all these things. I would be able to set up. Here's just one thing I would do. I can see them doing this as the settlers. I would set up multiple structures. And on a rainy day, I would go from one structure that I'd sleep in to another structure that I'd do something else in. Why? Because I need to have a variety. If you don't, it drives you insane. If you're stuck in a tent for like 5 days straight because the rain will not stop pounding on it, you're going to be driven insane. You're going to have to leave there because your emotional health is more important than a $500,000. So, anyways, all this said, I love that show, but it reminds me of the settlers coming for the first time and trying to settle in the Americas and trying to just survive. The people on Alone, they only survived for like 60 days. One time did they make it to 100 days. These people lasted there for years. And some people, again, like we were talking about, was it 90 out of 500 settlers made it in Jamestown during the starving time. So, yes, thank you so much for joining me today, and we will catch you next time. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye. If you have any comments or questions, add them to the comments below. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow, actually. Take care. Bye.